So it's Luke 10, verses 25 to 37. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbour?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half naked. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he travelled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, and he bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Now which of these 3 do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied. Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for what we have heard so far today, and we pray for David, who will be speaking to us in a moment. We thank you for the work that MAF do. We thank you for what we're about to find out about this work. We pray that your words will come through David as we listen to him. Amen.
Andy, thanks, and thank you all for inviting me along here today. It's always great to be here in a Baptist church. I'm not a Baptist myself for my sins. I'm an Anglican, and it sometimes feels like it's for my sins. Yes, thank you for that. Because you are so connected to mission that you really show everybody, I think, how it should be done, and we've seen that today. And there's not really much I can add to that. You support people, you go and do it. And you provide the base, the anchor, as Andy has said. The story of the Good Samaritan is a very familiar story, and you've probably done it so many times, there's probably not much you think you can learn from it. I want to see if I can just tease a little bit of extra meaning out of it before we think how MAF might actually work in the mission field. The first thing to notice is that Jesus is answering a question: who is my neighbour? And in answer to that question, he tells this story about the Good Samaritan, with which you're very familiar. But if you just think about it a moment from a sort of heroes and villains standpoint, just think about the villains in this story at the moment, because there are the robbers who stripped this man. Stripped him. It doesn't actually say that he was robbed. Presumably they took his cash as well, but they took his clothes and left him half dead by the side of the road. And then there were the 2 guys who hurried by, a priest and a Levite, religious men, basically. And this man was on his way to Jerusalem, so presumably here we're talking about Jews, about Hebrews, and people you would expect to be your neighbour, the people who are living in your country, the people living nearby, turn out not to be the people who are actually prepared to help. It's a very, very telling point, isn't it? That actually sometimes your neighbour is not actually the person you think it is. The robbers, for instance, were only interested in themselves and not interested in anybody else. And the priest and the Levite, we don't know why they didn't want to stop and help. We get an idea that perhaps they thought it might be an ambush, they thought they might get held up, or it might just actually interfere with their schedule if they helped somebody out, because they had other things to do. And we in the Western world are very good, aren't we, at looking after number one, making sure we're all right, and rushing by when there's plenty of need about. I don't need to tell a church like this that, but let's just flip over the coin a bit and look at the heroes. Who is the obvious hero in this story? The Samaritan. Just think a little bit, though, about the background of this man. Samaria is effectively another country next door to Israel, or was next door to Israel. And if you know your Bible well, you know that Jews and Samaritans don't actually get on terribly well. There's that little bit where Jesus is talking to the woman at the well, and she's a Samaritan, and she says, "How come you're talking to me? You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan." They didn't get on at all well. And yet this foreigner turns out to be the neighbour to the man who's in need by the road. And so Jesus very neatly points out that your neighbour actually can be somebody from a long, long way away. Somebody you don't even know, somebody from a foreign nation, somebody you might not naturally get on with. And that's a key point in mission. You can see that with the mission partners you support and the areas they work in and the difficulties they have. There's one other man in this story who's probably, in my book, a hero. And who is he? The innkeeper. Who said that? Brilliant, thank you. If you think about it, this man, he makes his living providing accommodation, food and drink to people. He owns a pub, basically. He runs a pub. And he just wants to get the drinks across the bar, get the money in, and make a living that way. But, presumably in this story, he acts faithfully. He, to use that horrible term, he steps a little bit outside his comfort zone, doesn't he? Because this Samaritan comes along with a casualty, a man who needs looking after, needs tending, and he says, look after him. Oh, and by the way, I'll pay you to do it. Here's some money. So he's being asked to do something he's not probably comfortable to do, something that's going to occupy his time, but he's prepared to do it. And there's another lesson there, isn't there, that sometimes we have our plans, we have our priorities, and God springs up with something else and says, this is what I want you to do. And we have to faithfully follow that and do what God is calling us to do, even if it's meaning stepping outside what we would normally do. And as we go about our daily lives, it's probably worth remembering that the world would be a much, much better place if people who've made a bargain, yeah, okay, I will do that, I will actually do what I've agreed I will do and what I'm being paid to do. Because we all know there are plenty of examples in this world where that doesn't actually happen. One more hero in this story, at least one more hero. And who is that?
The donkey.
You've been reading my script, Andy?
No.
Okay. Yeah, yes. You've got a casualty by the side of the road, presumably in the middle of nowhere. We don't know how far this inn was. We don't know how far the Good Samaritan actually come. You've got an unconscious casualty, and you need to get him to help. How far can you carry an unconscious person? Not counting the little ones down here, right? Because we all know we can carry them a fair distance. A fit person, how far do you think you can carry somebody?
Meters.
A meter.
A metre? Yeah, I like that. Who said that? Quarter of a mile, yeah, at a push, yeah, I think, yeah. Once upon a time when I was younger, I used to play rugby. We used to do rugby training, carrying each other up and down the rugby pitch. And it's absolutely exhausting. I don't think you could carry somebody more than a few hundred metres. You certainly couldn't carry them a mile, 2 miles, 5 miles, 10 miles, however far this inn was, which then became a temporary hospital and where this man could receive some form of medical aid. The donkey illustrates the need for transport when you're serving God in most places in the world, but certainly in remote places. You need transport. And that's where MAF comes in. Prefers to be called MAF. I'm going to call it MAF half the time. I know I am, but there we go. Because, next slide please, if you obey that command in the Great Commission we saw earlier, to go and make disciples of all nations, or as it says in that other Great Commission at the beginning of Acts, to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. If you obey those commands, you end up going to places where roads might look like this, not like they do here in this country. Not sealed tarmac or concrete surfaces, literally just graded earth, which is absolutely fine when it hasn't been raining. It's absolutely fine if you've got a nice four-wheel drive vehicle like you see with this Land Rover here, somewhere in the middle of Africa. But if the roads are heavily trafficked at all, or the weather is bad, then they very quickly, those roads become impassable. This is the main road between two countries in Africa, between Uganda and South Sudan, up in the north of Uganda and in south of southern Sudan. And as you can see, it's impassable to vehicles. It's just about impassable on foot, actually. And if we look at the aerial view, you'll see that because of this quagmire in the middle of the road, the traffic between two countries has actually stopped. And in the process of trying to get round this marsh in the middle of nowhere, people have actually made the problem much worse. Nobody and nothing is going anywhere very quickly in a situation like this. And this happens all over the developing world. And then even if you've got decent infrastructure, bridges and the like, then poor maintenance, a bad weather event, or an overloaded truck can cause that infrastructure to be destroyed, as you see in this bridge here. Again, South Sudan. And it's not quite like the UK if a river crossing is destroyed. The next river crossing might be 300-400 miles away in another country. And nobody's going to be crossing anytime soon. And then in some parts of the world, literally you are at the ends of the earth. This is Papua New Guinea, which is a mountainous, rainforest-covered country. It's basically mountains, jungles, rivers and swamps, as you see on the slide here. At a conservative estimate, there's something like 5,000 towns and villages in Papua New Guinea that will never ever have a road built to them. And so when there's a life-threatening situation, being able to fly becomes a matter of life or death in a situation like this, because to get to medical help can be 3, 4, 5, in some cases even 10 days trek out of the jungle on somebody's back. This is MAF, Mission Aviation Fellowship. We're a Christian charity, and our purpose is to fly small aeroplanes, basically, light aircraft, so that people in those remote parts of the world, developing world, can get the help they need. And the second point points out how busy we are, in that on average, every day, night, 365 days a year, one of our aeroplanes is taking off or landing somewhere in the world, bringing 3 key words, really: help, hope and healing. Help might be disaster relief. Hope might be the Christian gospel. Healing might be, obviously, medical help. All started after the Second World War. Air Force personnel, both sides of the Atlantic, Christian people thinking and praying how they could use those skills to help people rather than to destroy things and to kill people, very quickly realised that you can do an awful lot of good with a small aeroplane. Survey flight went out from the UK in 1948. We set up in southern Sudan, now South Sudan, in 1950 with the splendid biplane aeroplane. I won't ask any aircraft spotters here, haven't really got time. The story of that is a book called Hope Has Wings, which is on my table next door if anybody's interested, along with some other books. The story of setting up the organisation after World War II. And from those small beginnings, one aircraft from the UK in Africa, one aircraft from the US operating in Central America after the war, we now operate. We have main bases in 25 countries, and we operate into nearly 40 countries around the world. Countries you see in the red here on the world map. No prizes for geography, developing world, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Central and Southeast Asia. And from small beginnings, I can now promise you that we fly to more destinations than any airline, which is actually quite fitting. We fly to around about 1,800 destinations around the world. British Airways, I read about 3 or 4 weeks ago, flies to around about 200, just under 250 destinations worldwide. So if you like to think of MAF as the airline of the church, then it's actually quite fitting that MAF flies to 7 or 8 times more the destinations that one of the world's biggest, the world's favourite airline flies to. Favourite, yeah, okay. And we fly light aeroplanes, small aeroplanes. They're all propeller-driven aeroplanes. Not talking big airliners here, and with only 2 or 3 exceptions, they're all single-engine, single-pilot aeroplanes. Like you see here, Cessna Caravan, basically a sort of dozen seats, dozen passengers. A Cessna 206, older aeroplane, total of 6 seats, including the pilot, so not big. A couple of examples of our fleet at work. In Africa, aircraft in Chad on one side, aircraft loading up in Nairobi, Wilson Airport, Nairobi in Kenya. Nothing very exciting on the side, that they're just boxes and people. But I can promise you that virtually anything is flown in the back of an MAF aeroplane. If you can get it in through the door, even if that means taking it apart, then it will have flown in a MAF aeroplane. That's everything from food to photocopiers, cement and other building materials, to computers, and medicines and the like, to full-grown animals on occasion. Okay, we're an international team, a worldwide team, as you've seen on that map. All sorts of skills. Obviously, you need pilots to fly airplanes, but then you need engineers and electronic technicians to maintain them. You need managers, accountants, bookkeepers, secretaries to run a small airline, relatively small airline. We've got over 130 aircraft operating in nearly 40 countries around the world, so not that small. Around about 1,400 people working for us worldwide, of which about 300 are missionaries, in the sense that you and I understand missionaries, people sent from the developing world out to the developed world, out to the developing world, supported by families, friends, churches here back home. Around about 200 pilots, around about 100 engineers, just to give you a few figures, to give you some idea. Next slide. And what we do is provide, as the airline of the church, we actually provide the transport that helps other organisations to get in to do the work they otherwise couldn't do because of poor communications or total lack of communication. So every day we're working with government departments, international aid agencies, local churches, evangelistic organisations, you name it, providing things like healthcare, disaster relief, water engineering, Bible translation, or responding to medical emergencies, for instance. Basically what we do with an aeroplane is to cross obstacles, and we cross them quickly and safely. You don't go around the world in ships any longer, despite the anchor here. But you fly, you cross those big obstacles like oceans and continents in aeroplanes. In our case, we're crossing still quite big obstacles like mountain ranges, jungles, swamps, river systems and the like, bringing that help, hope and healing to far-flung communities. And then when life's at stake, then an MAF aeroplane can very quickly become an ambulance. Nothing fancy here, just put the casualty on the floor, in the back, on a blanket, on a mattress or something. But they can be, with skilled medical help, within hours, sometimes within minutes rather than days. And the sort of barriers we overcome mean that we put airstrips in some of the remotest places on the planet. This one is on the side of a hill on Borneo Island, country of Indonesia, a place called Budak Kabul. Nobody else flies into a strip like this. If you go up into northeast Uganda, you'll find that MAF serves northeast, northwest Uganda, areas that have been fractured by war and separated from the rest of the country, made dangerous by civil insurgency. Because we operate into strips like this, then medical programs can take place. Medical work that you and I would take for granted can go on in these remote communities, vaccinating children against easily preventable diseases like measles, diphtheria, polio and the like. Antenatal care for women, etc. education programs. Teachers can actually stay there and work with their communities rather than feeling that they're so isolated and they can get more money working elsewhere. This is on the side of a hillside in Papua New Guinea. You can see the trees on the hills, you can see the cloud on the top of the hills, you can see the engine of the aeroplane approaching what is an airstrip in Papua New Guinea. For all the world, it looks about the size of a tennis court. It must be of the order of 200 or 300 metres long, but it's one of those interesting little one-way strips we go into where you can only go in one way and you have to come out the same way, because being on the side of a hill, aeroplanes don't out-climb terrain very well, so you have to come out the same way. Again, nobody else flies into a place like this. If any of you do YouTube, you can go, search for MEF videos on YouTube and you find some interesting shots of flying into, video clips of flying into airfields around the world. So, sort of barriers we overcome. Natural disasters. This picture was taken after the tsunami, Boxing Day 2004 in Indonesia, when we were able to respond with 3 aeroplanes to provide the only way into those devastated communities down the coastal strip. When villages are cut up from basic medical care, then MEF can get doctors, nurses and medical equipment and materials in. In the case here, you see a skilled eye surgeon in Bangladesh. We work with CBM, Christian Blind Mission as it was called, in Bangladesh and in East Africa, working on eye safaris, restoring sight to hundreds of people in a space of about 2 weeks. And then war and insecurity are a fact of life for many, many people on our planet. South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, just examples of recently where we've had to evacuate people because aeroplanes provide a safe way in and out over fighting that's going on the ground. We work with partners. We provide the transport, basically, airline of the church, Christian air taxi organisation. So we work with hundreds of organisations around the world. These are some of the ones we work with in East Africa. You'll recognise well-known Christian charities amongst them, like World Vision and Tear Fund, Wycliffe Bible Translators. You'll notice also some well-known humanitarian organisations like Oxfam and Médecins Sans Frontières. We will work with anybody who wants to bring help, hope and healing to people in remote places. Around about 300 organisations in East Africa. We have nearly 1,500 partner organisations around the world, so I couldn't possibly list them all. I notice on your board next door you've got a thank you letter from WorkAid just down the road, or just up the road here at Chesham. And I was talking to another church only about 5 or 6 weeks ago where they said that, we've just been out to Nairobi with MAF as part of WorkAid, delivering tools and sewing machines and the like in East Africa, and it was fantastic to find a little local organisation that was also one of our partners. Flying makes a difference. That link, providing that link to people in remote places is absolutely essential. 4.5 hours over a mountain ridge for Elisha and his fellow evangelists in western Tanzania, sharing their faith with their fellow tribesmen. Or you can do it in 6 minutes in an aircraft. And Elisha and his team know that to reach more and more of their Maasai tribesmen, they need to open up more airstrips, get MAF even more deeply involved to get around that huge area. And a 7-hour road journey in difficult conditions in Bangladesh becomes just 40 minutes by air. Bangladesh, interesting country, just to prove that aeroplanes float, as long as they've got floats on them. Here's a picture of our amphibious aeroplane in Bangladesh, unloading supplies into one of 3 remote floating hospitals operated by charities on that river delta system. Bangladesh, a very interesting country. It's basically flat. It's waterlogged. It's a river delta system. Not much of the country is above about 2 metres above sea level, so it suffers dreadfully from flooding from the rivers and from storm surges coming up the Bay of Bengal. And if you go on to the next slide, it's just an example. Last weekend, in fact, one of these cyclones swept up at the Bay of Bengal, and MEF was on standby, and the next day went to do survey flights with aid agencies. Luckily, it wasn't a huge cyclone, there was no great storm surge, and there was just a lot of flooding, destroying people's livelihoods, but not too many people killed. November 2007, there was a huge cyclone called Sidr, which devastated the coastal regions of Bangladesh. 3,000 people were killed, 1.5 million made homeless. And MAF, which has one aeroplane in Bangladesh, received over 250 requests for help the next day after that disaster. Well, we couldn't respond to them all, but we did initial assessment flights with aid agencies working out what the priorities were, and then we're very busy getting in relief aid, water purification equipment, shelter and the like, with numerous aid agencies. Two of them, Habitat for Humanity and Christian Aid Ministries, have long-term projects to provide storm-resistant shelter to replace people's homes that have been destroyed there. And they built 500 new homes in a place called Mirzaganj, which is where Henna, this little lady, lives. She lost her home in that cyclone. She survived by clinging to the wreckage of what was left of the house for about 3 hours before she was picked up. But these two charities working with MAF have been able to get into that remote area, build these new homes. She now has a new home, which hopefully will survive the next cyclone. Because if you live in an area that gets flooded, what's the one thing you want to do to make sure you don't get flooded the next time water comes storming up the Gulf? If you haven't walked down by the Thames recently, build your house on stilts, because next time the water goes underneath and you can sit on top and hopefully survive. A simple, crucial, obvious modification to make in places like this, but I diverge and I must wrap up. We are a Christian charity. We rely on supporters, people like yourselves, like myself. I've been a supporter for the best part of 40-odd years now, since I came across MAF at university. We need supporters to provide the 3 Ps along the top of the slide. People to go and do the work, and so if you know anybody who fancies a challenge, the leaflet "Could This Be You?" is on the table next door. We could use just about any skill. You don't need to be a qualified pilot. We can use all sorts of skills in MAF, and it will tell you how to get in touch with us. But we need people in other roles as well, like you are doing now with those 5 or 6 mission partners you've got in different parts of the world to provide the support, basically. You might want to consider not only volunteering your talents, but if you're not somebody who's feeling called to go overseas, then you can support us in a number of ways. Obviously, the second P, pounds, is quite important, but I don't go around asking good Christian people who have already worked out what they can afford to give, what they want to give, and how to support it. But there are other ways you can support us financially. You might be considering doing your will or redoing your will. Just remember that, family and friends come first. Absolutely accept that. But when you've gone, just 1% of your estate will make a huge difference to other Christian charities. And just to put that in context, 1 in 10 of all our flights, 1 in 10 of all our flights are fully paid for by gifts that people have left us in their wills. You can raise finance other ways. MAF is doing a thing called Bake Off to Take Off. There's a card like that on the table next door. And MAF will send you a folder which tells you how to organise a coffee morning or a tea party, gives you suggestions, gives you invitations, balloons and labels and things, and you can raise money for us that way. So that's always a good one. Another one? Yeah, boring old postcard. What do you do with your old postcards? Recycle them, throw them away? You might consider collecting them for MAF. We have a team of several volunteers headed up by a clergyman who lives in Essex, who sort through all the postcards that people collect and last year they raised about £20,000 by selling old postcards. Even ones which are just boring old postcards from people's holidays can be bundled up and sold for £5 a bundle. And some quite nondescript and not particularly old cards are sold for £300 or £400. So if anybody wanted to collect postcards, please do consider that. Most important thing that any of you can do, like you're doing for all your missionaries, is that last P, the prayer. This is God's work, about walking and talking the gospel out in the world. And there are enemies out there. There is an enemy out there who doesn't want to see it happen. And we need the full power of God supporting and underpinning this work, keeping us safe. And we know it does. And anybody can pray. You don't need to be young. You don't need to be fit. You don't need to be very skilled and very intelligent. Anybody can pray. Just a few minutes a day. We try and make it easy for people to pray for MEF. Every 3 months we send out to our supporters a magazine telling you about the sort of work we're doing, and a prayer diary goes with it. So you've got people and things that associated with MAF you can pray for every day. And we send that out absolutely free. All we need is your name and address on the sign-up sheet, which is next door. And we have literally thousands of supporters around the country. People who support us by prayer, people who provide a few pounds. We have some very generous donors who've provided brand new aeroplanes for us in the recent past. But you can pray. Please do consider praying for MAF. I thank you for the help that you have actually given to MEF in the past. I know there will be MEF supporters here amongst you, otherwise I probably would not be here. So thank you for those people. Thank you for the support you're giving us today with the collections. That's really superb, and it will enable this work to go on, bringing help, hope and healing, showing the Christian gospel to people in remote areas around the world. So if you give me the next slide, I'll just say thank you. You can find out more about us on our website, very easy to remember, maf-uk.org.